Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of In a Lonely Place with Matt Pinfield. That is me, and once again, we started this early on in the pandemic, and I decided that it was a great name for a show, being that I love the 50s Humphrey Bogart movie and the Smithereens song, In a Lonely Place with Suzanne Vega, and the New Order song as well. So it's a perfect title. And I'm really happy to have my guest today as a guy that I've really been a big fan of ever since I first heard his band Trip Shakespeare, which was the first band that he was in, and then was playing him on the radio with the very first Semisonic record, a song called Down in Flames that I loved, and of course on 120 Minutes, which we literally posted a great thing about the show with the actual episode and every record that we played, because somebody did an exhaustive thing and literally documented every song and every guest that was ever on 120 Minutes when I was hosting Dave Kendall, depending on who it was. And it's really exciting. But anyway, I am extremely excited to have a songwriter, vocalist that I love and a big fan of. And they have a brand new single out we're going to talk about as well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dan Wilson. Dan, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hi, Matt. Nice to see you again. Nice to see you. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm so I've been so just admiring what you've been doing for quite a few years, and just so proud of you, and just because we go back literally to the Trip Shakespeare I played on the radio in New Jersey in Asbury Park, and then Down in Flames. I just was in love with that. I remember when that came out as a single, and I was in love with that song, and then got to work with you on 120 Minutes, and just. We always kind of had a great vibe and kind of a distant friendship, but I love the fact that everything that you've done since then. I remember talking about you when I was hosting the VH1 Top 20 Countdown, and Not Ready to Make Nice was number one, and kept being number one every week. You know what I mean? So I was like, I get to talk about Dan Wilson. I get to give Dan Wilson some plugs and some props, and it was just super cool. How you doing, man? How's everything during this whole pandemic?
Well, it's pretty wild. I always have various musical projects going on. This was going to be a very different season for me because the Semisonic EP, first thing we've done in like 19 years, was going to be out in June or this month, I think, and we had a lot of shows booked. So that's not happening, and that was I'm disappointed because I like to play for people, and so that's been a big change. On the other hand, in the meanwhile, I've been writing songs and getting together with people virtually and making new tracks for myself and other people. So there's things to do for a musician, but connecting directly with an audience, I wish I was out doing that right now.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, we are really missing live music.
Yeah.
Like myself. And then musicians, all our friends and people that we know, it's just, I can't wait until we're on the other side of this so that we can get out on the road.
Me too.
Me too. So there was a great story about, it was kind of writing for Liam Gallagher that kind of got you started with the Semisonic thing again, which was great news to our ears. But so tell me about that experience. What was that about? And
well, I met with Liam. He was working on songs for an album. There was I'm a huge fan of his singing, and I just love I love his work so much. And so we had a meeting, and we got a chance to chat for a while, chat about music, and just talk about possibilities. And then there wasn't time for us to do a session, and I think he basically said, if you have any ideas, just like send them along, send them to me in England. So I got all excited, and this is after I had been trying to write a new Semisonic song for 10 years, I'm sure. We got off the road. It was a good change for me. I started working with other people, the Dixie Chicks and various things like that, and Adele. I just had a lot of opportunities to have really interesting musical experiences, but I kept thinking I want to get the band back together and write some songs. and I would write a song and it wouldn't be a proper Semisonic song. And I was always a little disappointed. I'd be like, okay, this is good, but it's not right for the band. Anyway, I wrote a couple ideas with Liam in mind, and I sent them. And I got word back really quickly. Oh, so sorry, the album's actually done. You know, you're too late.
Yeah.
But then when I listened to those songs, especially one of them, I realized that it didn't sound like Liam Gallagher at all. One of them in particular sounded just like Semisonic, and I was overjoyed. I was so happy. Maybe just thinking about Oasis and the late '90s, you know, put me in the right mood, or I have no idea, but it just sounded like my band. And we didn't use that one, but it was almost like I got the password to the website of my old self, and I just kept signing in and writing new songs. So I got like 15 or so proper Semisonic songs, and when I got together with John and Jacob to play them, I was nervous, but they worked. They sounded just like the band. So happy news. I still owe Liam a thank you, actually. I haven't contacted him.
That's great, though. I mean, you know, obviously we're both mutual Oasis fans, and it reminds you of that period of time. So tell me about getting reconnected with John and Jacob. Were you always kind of in touch with them? And are they based in Minneapolis still, or where are they?
John is in Minneapolis. John Munson plays the bass. Jacob Slichter, our drummer and string arranger and lots of other things, lives in New York City. He wrote a book called "So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star," and he currently teaches creative writing at Sarah Lawrence. Wow. He's an amazing writer, and we've been friends all during this time when I've been doing other musical projects, and they have also. We've been friends. We even to the point where, like, every year we would try to find a benefit that we could play, just so we could hang out, you know, and be useful to someone. So, like, we've definitely seen each other more than once a year, every single year since Semisonic stopped touring. And for three people who live in three different towns, it's hard to get everyone together, but we always managed to do it. So we've been close all along, but I just never had the batch, you know?
Yeah. I'm just glad you did. You know, I mean, you said you came up with about at least 14 or 15 song ideas, and now you're going to put out an EP, right? And
yeah,
this first single is great, and it just sounds like it's so of the time lyrically. Wow. You're not alone, which is kind of the message that everybody has been trying to portray. I mean, I know on a personal level, I've been saying that to other people that have been struggling during COVID. So and I always love that line, "You're not alone," from, you know, Bowie at the end of Ziggy Stardust and Rock and Roll Suicide, right? I mean, it's like just when he screams that, it's just brilliant. But so tell me about writing this song.
Well, this was sometimes I write a song and I just can't remember what happened. And this is one of those songs. All I knew was when I started writing it, I was thinking about the guitar parts that I always liked to play with Semisonic, and I just kind of accidentally wrote a new one that sounded like that classic kind of me riff. And I actually remember thinking that, oh, John and Jake they're gonna laugh because it just sounds like me. And the rest of it, though, it all happened in kind of a blur. This was probably early 2018, and I was thinking about politics and how dark and dismal it was, and I was thinking about people's patience having run out, people's hope on almost like hanging by a thread. I was thinking about my own sense of desperation. I was thinking about being isolated in the world. And so it just all kind of fell out in a rush, you know, and then when we organized the record and like put together tracks and everything else, it seemed like this was the one to lead off with. So we made that plan. And after all that, I don't know, you have discussions, something seems obvious, you do it. But after all that, then the pandemic hit. and then, the Black Lives Matter protests started up, and I was kind of torn because I almost feel like it sounds like I wrote the song for this moment in time, but I didn't, and I don't want to make any claims for it, except for I think I was just like plugged into something that's been under the surface for a while and waiting to happen. So we finally decided, we're going to put it out, and it's too bad we can't tour, but I'll just write a bunch more songs, he said.
Yeah, and keep working on it and having a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine being from Minneapolis in that area when everything kind of just went off up there. I mean, I'm sure it affected you personally. I mean, emotionally, right? How did you feel about that?
Well, my parents and my siblings and their families are all there in the city. Nobody moved away from town. Nobody's in the suburbs. Everybody's right where all the action was. And I was pretty nervous about all that. I was, and they were really nervous. So I got a lot of that. There was a lot of FaceTime.
Yeah.
And, I feel bad for Minneapolis to have been the focal point of something so terrible that happened with George Floyd, but it's not the only place in the world it's happened. And I mean, far from it, as we all know.
Yeah.
I feel like, I know people in Minneapolis don't want to be seen as just that, but
no, I mean, it's one of the great music towns. There's so many things about it.
But it's those uprisings had to happen. That had to happen, and if it had to start somewhere, then
yeah,
it had to start somewhere. So
yeah, I mean, it's almost amazing it didn't start earlier in places like Brooklyn because the same exact things happened.
Right. So,
but I mean,
I'm far from home, and I feel I'm just sad I can't go see my folks and my siblings right now. That's just selfishly.
But that's the hardest thing right now. I mean, isn't it? I mean, it's everybody because it's the same reason I can't go and visit my daughter in Brooklyn or my daughter down in Florida because I mean I can't. I mean, I'm worried about I don't want to pick something up on a plane, and and also do I have time for a 2-week quarantine? You know what I mean? Either. Just
yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know what I always wanted to ask you, Dan, because it's been a while since we've actually caught up on things. And,
I feel like every couple of years in the subway in New York or something like that. Like I feel like you in the funniest places, like in buildings or things like that.
I have. Like we'll be passing somewhere, and it's like, Dan, what's going on? There's always a warmth because we've always had that, which has been very cool. And I'm glad we're here today to do this.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, but I wanted to just say that I love the thing you becoming a songwriter and then working as a co-writer with different people. Tell me about how that transpired. What was the first thing that got you into that? Because of course everybody realized what was happening when the Dixie Chicks song, you won the Grammy as well, and that song was also in reaction to something politically, but it was a great song. So tell me about the beginnings of you actually. What was the catalyst for you starting to become a co-writer and to write for other people?
Couple things. My parents were sort of too late to be hippies. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a doctor. And my earliest memories, my dad was a doctor in the Navy. So we lived down in North Carolina, in Camp Lejeune. And a lot of my earliest memories are of them playing records down there. And they definitely, they liked those Beatles records. And then as like the 60s progressed, they they liked those folk records, like they liked the Kingston Trio, and they got into Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they didn't like Bob Dylan, but they really loved Carole King. So like my youth, childhood, and then like elementary school years is like my parents were constantly playing the Beatles and Carole King, James Taylor, those records in our house. And when I read the liner notes, I remember learning that Carole King had written James Taylor's song "You've Got a Friend." It's like one person could write a song that another person could sing, and that struck me because I always just assumed that people just wrote the songs that they sang, and that was that, because they just thought of it and sang it. And then I learned more about, like, my parents had Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles album, and on the back it has all the lyrics of all the songs, and then at the very end it says Lennon, McCartney, almost like crediting all these lyrics to these two people that were working together on all the songs. So I had this picture in my mind that I could write songs with other people. And when Trip Shakespeare, and Semisonic, those two bands of mine, wrote songs, a lot of the times we wrote them in sound check or, in the hotel rooms or whatever. So I was totally down for that kind of collaborative songwriting because of being a band guy. And so when Semisonic stopped touring, I just started I just asked as many people as I could, hey, do you want to write a song with me? And a lot of people said no. Or people would say, oh, I write songs in such a weird way. You wouldn't, I'd be embarrassed to show you how I do it. So it took me a long time, but like I finally did a couple of sessions. Like I wrote a song with Rachel Yamagata called I Want You. And it was so great. And Jason Mraz heard it on an album of hers, and he contacted me through her and can we write a song together? And it just was like, I just kept telling people, like, I want to find really brilliant people to write songs with. And I guess I said it one too many times, and then like it started slowly happening. I went down to Nashville a lot, learned how to do that Nashville thing of, it's 4:30. If we can get this bridge finished in 15 minutes, I can pick up my kids at their band practice and, bring them home for dinner. Like everyone had a real working person's attitude about songwriting in Nashville. I had never seen it before, but I learned a lot from that.
Yeah. So were Dixie Chicks? How did that connection take place?
The Dixie Chicks. That was interesting because at that time, first of all, I think the business had been trying to put me and the Dixie Chicks together to write a song for a while. But for whatever reason, it never happened. I liked their music a lot. I had seen them at several festivals, and I thought they were geniuses and so funny. But at that time, I was working a lot with Rick Rubin. And Rick had kind of, I don't know, like brought me along for the ride for several years of writing songs that he wanted to hear. He and I produced an album of mine together called Free Life. We had a lot of fun musical adventures, but he had decided that he and the Chicks had decided to work together, and then he started playing them songs from my solo record, Free Life. And I think the plan initially was for them to cut one of the songs called Sugar. And then Rick said, well, also, why don't you guys just get together and see if you can write a song? And we got together and we got along so well, and it was funny. And we seemed to be able to get to the uncomfortable heart of the matter pretty easily together. So we wrote a lot of songs.
Yeah, and that was a great experience. From there, let's talk about working with Adele, because I mean, obviously, someone like you was, such a unbelievable classic, and it was everywhere. It was one of the biggest records of the decade, obviously, and that song itself it resonated lyrically, emotionally with so many people. Tell me about the writing process and what you contributed and how the song came together.
Well, Adele and I got together in uh, a really small studio that I liked a lot in Hollywood called Harmony. They had a really, really nice piano. They had a they had a Steinway from the 20s, beautiful 9-foot Steinway from the 20s in a smallish room. It took up the whole room, but it sounded so great. And then they sold that Steinway and they got also a huge Yamaha grand piano that was just as amazing. So I just kept coming back to this place. And so Adele and I met there, and we hung out, chatted for a while. She showed me a whole bunch of YouTube clips of Wanda Jackson, the rockabilly queen from the 50s.
Yeah.
Crazy. I'd never seen Wanda Jackson, but that was great. And then she showed me a couple ideas. She showed me quite a bit of, not the whole song by any means, but a bunch of the idea for Rumor Has It.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's inside. I was like, this is a great song, but I'm not really very funny, like in my songwriting. And Rumor Has It's got to be funny. Like, it's got to be like sour but funny, and or dark but funny. Yeah. And so, and then she sang me the first 4 lines of the verse of what became Someone Like You. And it seemed like that was what she had. Like, there was no title, but it was a melody and a riff that she played on the bass. It was like a cool sounding bass riff. And we worked on that. I said, oh, let's do the ballad. That's more, I'll be able to be more helpful on that one. So I think we got some more lines for the verse. She's a really good lyricist, and she can write things on the fly, so I would say maybe more this, or maybe a little less that, or how about this for a melody? And sometimes she would, take my suggestions, and other times she'd say, or this instead. And we got to the point at the end of that day, early on, she was like, maybe not the bass, maybe not, and we tried it on guitar. She said, maybe the piano will be better. So I did that arpeggiated thing on the piano, and she goes, oh, that's way more inspiring. And then we really got rolling. We got half the song done, almost, say more than half the song done in one day. Next day we got back together, and I didn't, this shows you how little insight I have in some ways. I said, so do you want to work on that song we did yesterday, or do you want to do something else? And she goes, oh, we have to work on this song from yesterday. Now, it was called Someone Like You at this point. So we have to work on that song from yesterday for sure. And I said, oh, really? And she goes, yeah, I played it for my manager and my mom. And I was like, oh no, like, I don't like to play things in progress for people. Everyone always hates them, So I was like, oh, what did they say? And Adele goes, my manager loved it and my mom cried. And I was like, okay, half-finished song to make someone cry. It already had the mojo at that point, even.
Yeah.
Just finishing the song.
Certainly did. Now let's talk about some of the other country artists that you've worked with. Obviously, Chris Stapleton. How did that one come about? And working with him.
Stapleton and I played together on an in the round performance. Where you take turns singing your song, and the person before, I was after Stapleton in the round. It was like Ingrid Michaelson, Johnny Resnick, Stapleton, and me.
Yeah.
Every time Stapleton would play a song, I would just groan because they were so amazing, and then I had to follow each time. So we played That's the Difference Between Whiskey and You, and then I had to come after, etc. But we had a fun time on stage, and I contacted him through channels to see if he wanted to come down to New Orleans and write with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band and me. Yeah. Which I figured would maybe, I don't know if he was going to say yes or no, but it would have been an interesting thing to try. And he said, yeah, he'd do it. So we went down to New Orleans for 4 days and wrote with the Pres Hall Band and hung out and, went to restaurants and just became friends. It was a fantastic experience. And so we've written a lot of songs since then.
That's really cool. Yeah, Preservation, the jazz band, they are so cool. They did some stuff in New Jersey in a charity that, because with Danny Clinch and people like that, the
Yeah.
photographer, was my friend, from my area, and we were involved in the Light of Day, that whole the Springsteen and the whole thing for Parkinson's, because my brother has Parkinson's too. So I hosted one of those shows, and I love those guys. They're great. So were they fun to work with down there?
So fun. We had a really, really good time. And I think they were, I mean, I have some, if I'm jamming with people, like I have some friends that are bluegrass musicians, and I sometimes get to jam with them, and I know very well how to stay in the background on the guitar. Like I'm not here to impress anybody, and definitely with the Pres Hall band, I was the same way. I'm just like outlining chords. They would say, do this instead. And I'd be, yes, 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 I'll do that instead. Thank you, thank you. And I learned a ton. I learned a lot on that session. That was great.
Yeah, those guys are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Now, what about Taylor Swift and experience with her?
Well, Taylor Swift is like, I just think she's amazing. Like, I think, and as a writer, I think we keep forgetting about her, that she transforms herself from record to record so much. But I think people forget that, because each new record is such a like, oh, this is Taylor, bam, it's so like involving and so complete that it almost like makes us forget she's almost more like Bowie, because she's like changed her like persona and her presentation and her sonic style, so much. I think I loved working with her. I thought it was great.
Yeah. She's got a new record she just announced coming out. Her
I'm
8th
excited.
studio album, literally like
I'm excited about it.
a day or so ago.
Yeah.
So Dan, I love to do on the show. I love to talk about people's favorite records, or records that have inspired them. And
Cool.
and it's so much fun. So I was going to talk about these, and one of the first ones up, which was really interesting, was the jazz fusion band, of course, Weather Report, right? Heavy Weather, which was like their most successful record. And I love Jaco Pastorius, him and Wayne Shorter and those guys. I mean, they're really cool. My brother was my oldest brother, the one I was talking about, was friends with Jaco. You know what I mean? He knew him down in Florida. So yeah, and that, of course, that whole thing that happened to Jaco was so sad. But
Yeah.
And so tell me about your love for Weather Report and that record.
Well, I was I in maybe 10th or 11th grade? I was in this class in my high school. I feel so lucky. There was a class called Jazz Lab, and it was for the kids who didn't play the marching band instruments. Like, it was for kids who, like, at the time I played the electric bass in bands, because everyone always needed a bass player. So I played the electric bass in bands, and I signed up for this thing called Jazz Lab. And the older kids, like the kids who were a year or two older than me, were all into this record called Black Market by Weather Report. It was a jazz record, and it was a huge inspiration for me, because I just never heard anything like it. And it had this bass player named Alfonso Johnson, who was a monster, and also Jaco Pastorius played bass on it. And I just like copped licks from that record. And so when Heavy Weather came out, I was so primed as a Weather Report fan, and that record almost had like pop hits for a jazz band, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So that's
Birdland and stuff like that. Birdland was a really popular song to open that album, right?
Exactly. So I learned a lot about. I kind of learned about Joe Zawinul. Him and Wayne Shorter were the main songwriters of that band.
Yeah.
I just gathered as much lore as I could about how they wrote the songs. They had both been Miles Davis guys, and they had both written, like, Zawinul had written pop songs for Cannonball Adderley, who was another jazz great from the 50s.
Yeah.
And that, like, the idea that it was really inspiring to me that, like, Zawinul had been a writer for the other jazz ensembles he was in, and then he eventually started his own band, Weather Report, and wrote hits for that too. That definitely was always in the back of my mind.
Yeah, Cannonball Adderley was cool. I mean, he had that hit version like in the '60s too of "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy" that was really great. A live performance, which was cool. That actually became a chart hit, right?
Yeah, you hear like the clinking glasses and the people.
Yeah,
talking.
you can hear Baby Eggs Wild. You hear the club, it's like that's what I think is so cool about that recording. It's got this character. It's not like anything else, right?
Totally.
It's not like just like a live thing. You actually can feel the smoke of the club. You know what I mean when you're listening to it.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. Now you talked about your parents being Beatles fans and having Sgt. Pepper, but you picked as one of your favorites Abbey Road, and such a great record. I guess it was before the pandemic, there was this theater presentation. It was in certain theaters where they literally dissected all of Abbey Road as side two, and they did it by side. So it was beautiful to watch. I mean, the medley on side two is just one of my favorite things ever recorded. So tell me why you love the record so much.
Well, that was Abbey Road was one of my parents' favorite albums, and so we just listened to it all the time in our house. Like it would be going in the background when we were living our lives, and I think there's something about that particular album that feels like performances. Like it feels like a band trying things together, and even though there's beautiful string arrangements and some synthesizers that were obviously added later, it really has this vibe of like it's a group effort, and there's atmosphere around it. Like you can hear the room they're in. You can hear that. It's like Cannonball Adderley. You can hear the atmosphere around them, and I kind of figured that out. Basically, I think partly when my family got a pair of headphones, and then partly when my friends introduced me to smoking pot, I discovered how amazing the Beatles could sound in those headphones and how much atmosphere there was in that record. So I basically absorbed every note
of that record, which is amazing. Have you ever gotten to go over to Abbey Road and do anything in the studio there?
No, I'm always been a little jealous because I was with Semisonic in London one day, and there was an entire day off for everyone but me, and I had, I think, a day of interviews that day. And they all went to Abbey Road and like walked around in the echo chambers and turned the knobs and did all, took pictures of themselves in the classic Beatles places, on the street or whatever, and came back, and I'd had nothing to show for the day, but I was very jealous of them.
I get a feeling that they would welcome you with open arms, though, if you ever want to go back there, knowing the great hits that and so many things that you've written, and what a big part of the fabric of even the UK and British pop music. And
they like my stuff there for some reason.
It's funny because the first time I went to Abbey Road, I was there to do all these interviews for Live 8, not Live Aid, but the Live 8 in Hyde Park. Right. And I was doing A&R at the time, and I was vice president of A&R at Columbia Records. So I went up there, walked in and said, hey, I'd really like to see a tour of the place. I work at Columbia, and they took me around. So the next time I went back to Abbey Road, I was doing a morning show with Leslie Fram in New York City, and we got invited to do our morning show there the day they re-released all the Beatles albums on CD, the remasters, and when they did the Beatles Rock Band. So we did our show from Studio 2. And we got to come out and play with the machines, the 2 4-tracks that they used on Sgt. Pepper. The piano was in there. We had the Kooks come in and do you got to hide your love away and play. And we talked to Giles Martin, George Martin's son, and Norman Smith's son as well. The guys that were obviously involved in everything there. And it was magical just to be there. It was incredible, right?
Someday I want to go, and that sounds fantastic. I'm such a nerd. I would completely I would be knee deep in it very quickly. I'm super into that.
They would love you there. And it's funny, for years, speaking of cams, I don't know if they still have it, but they had a cam that was on the street where people crossed, because people were always trying to cross and do the 4 Beatles thing and get their pictures taken there. So there was a cam there just so you watch people nearly get hit by cars and make fools of themselves. And
they're trying to be the Beatles in the picture.
Yeah, I mean, It was really hard. I never really got a picture for the very same reason. I think someone might have taken it and has it that I was with, but I did try to cross the street. Too much traffic then. But I will tell you this, I just found out that during the pandemic, they finally did the street light. They did all the lines in the streets there where they were, because the traffic was so dead that they were able to finally put new lines there when you go to see where the Beatles crossed.
Beatles fan, that's awesome.
It's great, isn't it? It's a classic story. You mentioned Carole King earlier too, and Tapestry in 1971 was really, I mean, it was everywhere and such an important record and one of the biggest records of the 70s. And to think she came from this brill building, songwriting, pop writer like Neil Sedaka at the same time, and Neil Diamond and all these guys that were in that, right around that neighborhood of 1633 Broadway and all those different, buildings that were in there. I mean, this record is just amazing, song for song. Tell me why you love this one, Tapestry.
This is another one just from my childhood. My parents were super into it. Carol, I had a couple of songwriting sessions with Carol, and she, I learned so much from her, and that sense of how to be at ease with yourself, and thus put everyone else at ease at the same time. She had so much of that. She would suggest ideas, and if you didn't like them, or if you said, I don't know, she would never fight for her ideas. She would just go, okay, how about this instead? And she'd just pump out a completely different, brilliant, wonderful idea until finally she hit upon something, and then you'd go, I love this. And then that's what you were working on. That kind of unprecious confidence was incredible for me. But I would put Tapestry on my list, whether or not I had the good fortune to work with her later. It just was a full circle moment for me to be able to make music with a woman who had been so influential on me.
Did you, ever talk to her about that? Did you tell her that story that you told us, that you just told me about how, hey, I realized that you could actually write a song for somebody else, like the fact that James Taylor had the hit with you. You got a friend. Did you ever get to tell her that?
I never, it's a funny thing, because it took me a lot of interaction. I haven't interacted with her a ton in my life, but it took me a bunch of times talking to her to just get my feet on the ground. I was always in danger of saying something stupid, because I was such an admirer of hers. So I don't think I ever had a chance to say that. And also I think it might have just seemed too crazy fanboyish for me to be able to do it.
Yeah, but it must have been such a great time. It's interesting the people that she's written with over the years. I remember when she was working with the guy David Palmer, who, I met out here in Los Angeles, and David Palmer was the guy who was in Steely Dan for a minute, like he sang Dirty Work in Brooklyn.
Right.
Yeah, and he great singer, a real nice guy. He gave me a ride one day from a place we were at, and I realized he and he was there until Donald Fagen got the confidence to sing on the entire record. So he finally. Yeah. Gary Katz, the producer, had told me that he eventually told Donald, "Why you're writing these songs?" Right? And because he finally got his confidence up. But David Palmer ended up going on to work on Carole King album music and co-write Jazz Man and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. That fills in a blank for me, actually. I'm very happy to hear that, because that fills in a couple of blanks for me, like what happened to David Palmer after Steely Dan, but also there's a difference in vibe between the album music and the album Tapestry. Tapestry was also almost like a greatest hits record.
Yeah, because there was a lot of songs she'd written before.
Years before. Like she chose from like 10 years worth of work to do Tapestry. But music is also fantastic. But that's really interesting. I hadn't known about that connection, that Steely Dan connection.
Yeah, and it's cool. And David said he really loved working on that record with her. I remember when Jazzman came out as a single when I was a kid. I bought that at 45. I just loved that track. Such a good record. The sax on it is so cool. It's awesome. Now, Julius Katchen, let's talk about that because Encores is the album that you picked, which is, it's for a lot of people that might not know, that album came out in 1961, and it was originally a UK release was the first place that it was actually printed. But yeah. Julius, explain to everybody who Julius is and why you like him, because he's got what an incredible history that man had.
Well, I don't know much about his history. I know that he was he was almost like a famous classical musician. And he popularized a lot of almost like what would be like, your advanced piano lesson student pieces, or your intermediate, like he did Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring. He did a recording of that was very iconic. And he did, do you know, there's a Mozart thing that goes,
yeah, exactly. And that's great.
And I first heard that on a Julius Katchen record. So I don't know much about his history. I just know that album was, I don't know, it opened my eyes to classical music being music as opposed to just a thing you had to do to make your parents happy. That's my piano lessons were mostly like they make me practice. I have to do this. And then when I found that record, which was quite old by the time I listened to it.
Yeah, it came out in 1961 it came out, yeah.
Yeah, but I first heard it in like 73 or 74 or 75. Yeah. But it was like, oh, this is beautiful, amazing music. It's not just, it's like I treated it as though I was on the track squad and I was just running, I treated my piano like I had to do these laps,
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, shoot, this is beautiful.
And it felt great. So yeah, that's
what more do we know about Julius Katchen, though? I don't know.
Well, I mean, he's just the fact that he was so celebrated, and for all those years, and did all those things, like Ravel, and obviously Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, everything. But I got a great story for you that he actually performed at part of the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. They invited him to be there, and the only place that you could actually find documented parts of it are on the DVD. It's like a special DVD edition. But he was, and the incredible thing was, it was his last performance ever, and it was also Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones' last performance ever. Ooh. So they both, that was 1969, of course, and then, Brian died shortly after that, and so did Julius. Julius died around, yeah.
So he was he was part of the
Yeah, well, they were trying to have like real diversity. Obviously, Brian Jones was just he was on another level. Never got the credit he deserves. I love that in Bill Wyman's film, The Quiet One, he talks about Brian really deserves a lot of credit that he didn't get, because obviously he was playing all those different instruments and on all those mid-period Stones records, and he got things were a little rough for him, but but people don't realize is he was getting off the drugs and everything when before he passed away. It was he was getting his act together. He wanted to start a band that sounded like Creedence Clearwater Revival. After they kicked him out of the band and he cleaned himself up, he was like listening to Creedence, and that's what Brian Jones wanted to do. Anyway, so that was Julius's last performance, invited by the Stones. Is that cool?
That's amazing. And actually, I didn't. I've never seen the whole Rock and Roll Circus or whatever it was called, the Stones thing. But that actually kind of gives me a little thrill about the Stones, that they would have this very like classical musician be part of their wild review show.
Yeah, which was to promote Beggar's Banquet, and it was like, and they had all that other cool stuff. But yeah, it's available. It's on the DVD. I'll bet if you looked it up just on YouTube, you could probably find it, Dan. But I thought you'd want to check that out because it's cool and it's his final thing, Amazing. So I just want to share that with you. Now, another great album that you picked was Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are Changing," which was obviously, such an important record. It was. One of his, especially at that time, it almost, obviously right now would be just as relevant, So let's talk about why you picked that of all the Dylan records.
Wow. Okay. Well, it could have been a bunch of different ones. I'm just looking at the playlist. I feel like
Do you have a series of like a few Dylan albums that you love, like that are?
this is the third one or the second one, but no, it's the maybe it's the third one. But the first Dylan record is mostly covers, and I never really related to that. But then he did the one with "Blowing in the Wind." Is that the Freewheeling Bob Dylan?
Yeah.
And then I think maybe The Times They're Changing. But The Times They're Changing has that song, Hollis Brown, which is insane, with God and Boots of Spanish Leather and Only a Pawn in Their Game, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. This is just a furious record. This is just like the rage level is at 11, like for three, a little break with Boots of Spanish Leather, you know, but it's almost like how somebody with just an acoustic guitar and notebook and pencil could like create this boiling sense of emotion and outrage and have it last for 30 straight minutes. It's just, to me, like it's almost like he wrote a play about being outraged by injustice and politics and the unfairness of, you know, modern life. And I wore that record out. That one and Blood on the Tracks.
Yeah.
And yeah, like
his big relationship record, that was like, you know,
that one is, that's just sad. Yeah, I like the political one, but I also like Infidels. I also think it's incredible.
Yeah, you know, it's wild too. I'm blonde, but you know, I always talk about the version on that record with, you know, that sounds almost like a New Orleans kind of sounding. Most likely, You Go Your Way and I'll Go Mine when it opens the record. But, you know, you talk about his fury, and if you listen to the version that he did with that double live album, recorded here at the Forum in Los Angeles, the Bob Dylan the band before the flood, and it opens, and he's pissed. Like he's feeling those lyrics, most likely "You Go Your Way and I'll Go Mine." I mean, he's like, it's the most furious I've heard him sound on record. It was really badass. It was great.
I think there's a thing about that song also where he's talking about his audience too.
Yeah.
He's saying, if you can't hang with me as I go through all these changes, then you go your way and I'll go mine. Like, I think it's got a double meaning in there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're right.
He's intense. And that record and Blonde on Blonde is incredible. Highway 61 revisited. Just so many of those. I discovered Dylan in junior high, and my friends all hate. I've always been the person who loves the music that all my friends hated. So everybody hated Bob Dylan, and I would be listening to Bob Dylan, and everyone was so annoyed. Like I couldn't get enough of it, but they were all so annoyed.
Yeah, that's that you know, you were your own trailblazer when it comes to school. You know, I know what you're talking about. You know, because some music is definitely divisive because people don't get it. You know, I always tell the story about when I played people the first Ramones album, and people were either into it or they were like wildly opposed to that record.
Wildly,
yeah, you know what I mean. But but I loved it. I thought it just had the remnants of great old pop and garage rock and that kind of thing. But so Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? Obviously, the first Experience record that he did with Mitch and Noel. You also put that on there as one of your favorites. What is the thing about that record and Hendrix that you love?
Well, that's where I learned how to play guitar. Is trying in vain to play his parts. You know, like trying in vain to learn Purple Haze. You know, there's just so many like subtleties to the way he got his tone that it took me so long to figure out, like decades to figure out, and anything even close, and I'm not even close. But yeah, Hendrix was like, that was just that guitar trio. I mean, that's why Semisonic is a guitar trio to me. Like, just those Hendrix records felt like that, and the Who just felt like, oh, this is all you need is a singer and these three instruments, you know. And I think Hendrix was also, there was this thing where you could tell that they all listened to a lot of different things. Like
Yeah.
you could tell they listened to jazz records, and you could tell they listened to R&B, and you could tell that they were into rock and roll. You could tell that they were like, it's a similar thing to like listening to like hip hop records from the 90s, where you can just hear that kind of like omnivorous, like gathering from every possible source kind of thing. I admire that, and I dig that.
Yeah, and those records are all great. I mean, Access Bold as Love is another. I mean, I'm sure you love that too.
Oh,
Songs like Castles Made of Sand. I mean, he was very poetic. Besides the fact that he could, was just this one of the most innovative guitar players of all
yeah,
time.
Little Wing is just the best.
Yeah, yeah. So those records, those three records with the experience were incredible. I love those. Now let's talk about the Joni Mitchell album that you picked, because there's so many
Yeah.
great Joni ones. Why is this your favorite?
I'm assuming I said Hijira, and I think
Yeah.
that's the one.
Jira is the one you said, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I just, there's something about Joni Mitchell's another one who, when I was a kid, nobody else, I just had one friend who liked Joni, and we would listen to these records, Hissing of Summer Lawns and Hijira, and even Blue, the earlier ones.
Like
So great.
Spark, did you like Court and Spark too? I love that.
Spark, Court and Spark. Like those records that's a sound of somebody who just thinks that it's cool to just try anything that you want to. Like put it, edit two songs together, or put it, unplug it. Or get your favorite jazz musicians, change all the chords, make the harmony weird so folk people don't understand it anymore. Like,
Yeah.
like willing to go wherever her ears led her, and I think that kind of like, uncompromising, experimental vibe is what I like.
Yeah, and
Best.
Jaco Pastorius was on that record too. Jaco, which is so cool. So we got two records with Jaco on them on here.
Totally. And she also wrote Both Sides Now, and songs that were kind of like classic hit type songs, so we know she could do that, but she decided instead to like make things that were more circular in their form and more freaky. She just got freakier and freakier, and I just loved her more and more.
Yeah, I love that she didn't care. She just went in any direction that felt right to her. And she's so one of a kind, such a beautiful vocalist, songwriter, everything about it.
Yep.
Speaking of writing a song for other people, even though she did it, I mean, writing Woodstock for, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young was
Right.
amazing, right? And especially she wasn't there. I love the fact that it was from them telling her what it was like. She had this vision. I've always loved that. It's funny you mentioned Judy Collins too, and her on Both Sides Now, and one of my friends who I lost during COVID, who died, I remember having lunch with him, and he took me out to lunch, and we were hanging out, and a woman walks up to the table, and she's very friendly, very nice, and she's talking to him. It's my friend Neil Asher, who passed away, who was involved with the Grammys quite a bit in the music industry, but a great friend of mine, and was my sponsor for a while. And I remember when she walks away, he goes, Matt, that's Judy Collins. He goes, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, because obviously Stephen Stills wrote that song about her, and Both Sides Now. I love both her and Joni's versions are great, both of them,
Yeah. So super different and incredible singing. It's funny because I just finished, like I'm usually not so, when you ask me to make a list, and I think you said influential, or like what affected your life the most, almost.
Yeah,
And like that meant that I just had to like choose all this stuff from my childhood when it just like hit me the hardest, and so the awakening of hearing Jimi Hendrix, or like that sense of like, oh, you can do anything you want, that I got from Joni Mitchell, that was like so powerful. But I just finished reading this sad book about Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Neil Young is another one that I have such reverence for. But I read this book about Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young recently, and it was just hilarious because like a lot of the stories in the book are about how all these icons from the 60s and 70s were all basically sleeping with each other, and they're all in each other's songs. And I didn't know that Judy Collins was the same Judy of the Crosby, Stills and Nash, hit. And just it was funny to sort of think of it as like this long ago era, almost like the Rat Pack, in Vegas, like,
Yeah.
with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis all hanging out together. I mean, it feels like, Laurel Canyon was like that in the 70s.
Yeah. Have you seen that new 2-part documentary that was it's on Epix that my friend Jeff Pollock and a bunch of other people are involved in? But it's different than the Andy Slater one with Jacob Dylan that was
Right.
Echoes in the Canyon. Check out this 2-part one. It's great. I recommend it to anybody watching us right now. It's just called Laurel Canyon. The footage, the interviews, the stuff they take from a lot of people who are no longer alive, but it's great. You will really appreciate that in a big way.
I'll definitely now that I've got this time not going on tour with Semisonic, I can just watch documentaries on Netflix all day.
Yeah, that one will be really good to check out. You'll love it on Laurel Canyon. It's 2 parts.
Great.
Now we have one more record that you picked, and what a great double album that is! 1999 by
man.
Prince, which is such a phenomenal record.
Man. Yeah, well, being from Minneapolis and one of the things that Prince did for us in Minneapolis was just, I mean, none of us thought in my crew of people, none of us thought, oh, I'm going to be Prince,
Yeah.
But a lot of us thought, oh, you can do that from here?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, what? You can make pop records from home? That's amazing. And that was like Feeling Strangely Fine by Semisonic was made in downtown Minneapolis. And we never would have thought we never would have had the nerve to tell our label, oh, we're going to record it here in town, if it weren't for Prince. Prince made it seem like it's something you could do. Oh, you can make your hit.
Yeah.
Hometown. And not only that, I mean, I think about 1999 and just what a crazy, almost like kaleidoscope it was of ideas, but just how experimental it is, like.
Yeah, I mean everything.
Driver and just so many different, like wild notions, and then Little Red Corvette in 1999, and just like also, smashes.
Yeah.
But
I love Let's Pretend We're Married too, which of course, he goes and Dance Music, Sex, Romance, DMSR, right? All that stuff that's on there.
Yeah, all of my friends, back when Prince was making those records and we were in our 20s, all of my friends felt like Prince was writing those songs about us in our shitty apartments.
Yeah.
Like, really felt like we were the characters in Minneapolis in his songs, and not like we really literally had that ego trip about it, but literally we just felt like, yeah, that's our circle. Like that's what we're all going through in this Midwestern town, and Prince is out in the suburbs making these records. This is incredible.
Yeah, they were so great, so many of them, right? I love those records, and yeah, I mean, there's another incredible artist that we lost not that long ago now. It's incredible. About 4 years. Hey Dan, so listen, let's finish up by talking about the 5-song EP, and that's coming out in September, right? Is there a date for that? Is it like the 16th or?
It's mid-September sometime. The Semisonic record, I think it's mid-September. I think we changed it. It was going to be now, but I think we changed it to mid-September, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit really quickly about some of the other 4 songs that we're going to hear?
Sure. It's got a song called Basement Tapes, which is about basically being in a band and driving around the Midwest in a Ford van and making demos in a basement. And it's mostly, the idea was we just chose of the batch that I wrote, we chose the things that rocked the most in our particular way of rocking. Like none of it's like super heavy music, but it's all just like us playing loud and really simple, and mostly the vibe is just the trio playing as much as we can keep it to that. And that's what it is. It's just a rock band doing their thing.
Well, it's great to have you guys back. It really is, you know.
Thank you.
John and Jacob. I mean, it's just so cool to, and please say hi to the other guys for me.
I will. I totally will.
To them. You know, Dan, but thanks so much for coming. And for those people watching, if you haven't checked out the new single, you've got to. You're Not Alone. It's a great song. And if you love Semisonic like we do, you will not be disappointed. You'll love it, because I just love the way, and then when it gets to the chorus, like the way it kicks in, you know, the whole feel of it. So it's a great tune. It feels like
we just did what came naturally, and I guess we just used all our old tricks again, and it was fine. You know, it turned out really well. I'm happy.
Yeah, it almost feels like there was no time lost, which is a good thing, actually. I mean that in a good way. You know, because it's of the time, certainly, but it's like just the structure when the three of you play together. Yeah, it's a great feeling. You know what I mean? It's awesome. Yeah. Dan, thank you so much for doing this with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. This is really nice.
And good luck with everything. And I hope I'll see you out on the road when we're all allowed to do that again.
In real life. See you in real life.
Absolutely.
But maybe in the subway, we're passing each other.
Like we have so many times, right? I know. Or in some building, like we said. Yeah. You know? Right. Hey, what's going on? Oh, hey, Dan, it's good to see you, man. It's been a while. You know, every couple of years we do that, right? It was like literally, it was pretty funny. Anyway, thanks again. And Stan Wilson, everybody. Dan, take care. All the best to you and your loved ones, your family. This is In a Lonely Place. I'm Matt Pinfield, and thanks so much for joining us. Make sure that you stay safe, and we'll be back with you next week.